Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, or wherever it might be where you are. Welcome to our fifth session of Contemplating Reality. I'm a little bit sort of wondering whether we will need an additional session, just because we didn't get as far as I would have liked last time, and it is dense material. So I'm not going to really try to rush through things. I hope that's all right with you. Nobody will be charged extra for the additional hours that I'm raking up here. So it's just to let you know, just in terms of organizing your time and all of that. Yeah? Oh, I'm very glad to see that. Somebody's saying hello. Yes. That's great. Not to rush. So, okay, good. Anyway, let's see how we go. So, there's going to be some challenges in what we're looking at here. And this is a bit like, for me, Madhyamika reasoning is a bit like math. When I was a kid, I was dreadful at math. I was very good at the subjects where I could talk my way out of it. But you know, when the teacher, he would say, okay, and according to this equation, obviously x is, 34.8, then I was wondering, why is it obviously that? And I remember in our class, we had one kid, and at one particular stage anyway, who would always ask questions, and sometimes people would be annoyed with him. But I actually thought he was good, because he actually wouldn't really stop until he got it. And remember, when we're talking about emptiness, it's not like we like the Dalai Lama, and then he says everything's empty. Okay, that sounds like, that makes sense. Everything has no reality and yet is imbued with the core of Buddha nature and goodness and compassion and so forth. So all of that could very well be something that we just think, oh, I like that, But that's not how we operate here. We can't build bridges, and we can't do math, and we can't actually organize things just on the basis of feeling good about something. We actually have to see this. So when the sages, the old Indians or Tibetans or Chinese, when they would say things don't have any reality, it's not like some old sages had said to them and they had spent a life just feeling comfortable and, sort of fuzzy, warm about it and all of that. It was from actually looking. And what we're doing in Buddhism is really looking. So we have to be willing to certainly give this the benefit of the doubt. So it might not be that easily accessible sometimes. At the same time, I wouldn't worry too much about it either. It kind of just clicks in at one point. So I'll go, oh. And it's really worthwhile pursuing. It's very important, really. It's about us understanding our reality, no less. And also, it is for the reason of not understanding reality, really, that we sentient beings wander in samsara. And this is not just about an equation. This is really about us and that split where we solidify self and objectify other. And what comes from the solidification of the self, the solidification of other. Everything we're going to do with the Madhyamika reasonings is really just to say, we're not denying the functioning of anything. Things work as they normally do, but it's the attribution of something solid. And we do that habitually, just out of insecurity, just me and am I getting what I want, or I don't want that. So that's on a very basic, basic level. But there's also the place where philosophies come in and they begin to attribute solidity to phenomena. They begin to attribute solidity to the perceiving self and so forth. And that's where in a way, we're lightening, we're putting down a burden of having to, have philosophy, actually. The strange thing is that the Buddha won't say, things are impermanent because I say so, or because, but the Buddha will give a reason, because it's composite. And if you believe that things truly exist, well, then you can believe that things will never change. And clearly we can see that that's not the case. So we use this thing of what we call prasanga, or consequence. If we were to hold the cause as the same as the effect, then, like they sometimes would say, it sounds slightly rude or gross, but they would say, if you're gonna say that the cause and the effect are the same, then there would be no difference for you between food and shit. And so the sort of the idea that the cause of everything exists within everything, difficult position. And so we use these kind of consequences, and they can sometimes be a little bit terse in their formulation. But as far as Madhyamika goes, really, then what we have here is very gentle introduction to it. So anyway, welcome to. Kindly generate the awareness that what we're about to undertake could do something about the suffering that exists, and hence our project is not just dedicated to us, but to all sentient beings. I pay homage to the ocean of Dharma, I pay homage to the ocean of ethics, I pay homage to the ocean of qualities, and the oceans of compassionate ones who opened the Dharma gate. So we've looked here at the problem, the rope. We've looked at the various kinds of the rope that's misperceived as a snake. We've looked at the various ways that the teachings approach wisdom. We've looked at the way we can contemplate. We've looked at the notion of what it means, no self. We've looked at the first of the four tenets. The Vibhashika analytical approach looks at the object. The Sautrantika, the looking at how the self projects onto phenomena. We've then had first interlude, haiku, and then we've had an introduction to the radical nature of the Mahayana. Then we looked at the third tenet, which is then the mind-only school. And then we looked specifically at the three natures. And last time we looked at then also the middle way, what we also call Madhyamaka. And also we looked at the separation between the prasangika, which is this really just the hardcore, leaving things without any kind of assertion, with consequences. A bit like saying, well, if you can assert that, then that the absurd thing follows, that, food is shit and so forth. And for example, like we'll see today, then anything could arise out of anything. The notion, if things were truly coming from the other being really other, then it's like saying, well, they would just say, well, if you can assert that, then you can also believe that flowers will bloom in the sky, and rice seeds will give rise to tennis rackets. So that's where the prasangika would just leave it as it is, where we don't have the svatantrika, that kind of a bit more gentle, and assert then a more accommodating approach with the two truths and so forth. So these are interesting distinctions and very relevant for our project. So today we're going to look at the reasonings of the middle way. So there are 5 reasonings, and I've also put up in the reading folder a summary of these, a classical summary of these, and 2 of them really. One is called the Seat of Reasonings, which has all these 5, and another one is called the Madhyamika Reasonings by Mipam. That only has 4. It doesn't talk about the analysis of results, but it talks about it doesn't talk about the analysis of both causes and results. But these are ways where you can, if you want to have the classical presentation of it in a short way, then by all means. If you want to have more extensive, particularly that which that goes into the analysis of causes. Then you have this work here, and there are a few translations of it. Also, Tsongtse Rinpoche has taught it, but this is Chandrakirti's work that's quoted from quite a bit in here. So that's particularly with the second category of the what we call the Vajra slivers. So we do have, as you can imagine, actually you have a lot. You have a lot of works on this, and from the various traditions, Tsongkhapa's, what's it called again? Ludrup Gongyen, Nagarjuna's, the wisdom of Nagarjuna's mind. No, that's, is that it? No, he might be Rigved Gyamtso. Anyway, there's a few other. We also have a wonderful commentary by one called The Madman's Middle Way by Gindin Shimpa, and I think that's the one I was just referring to. Anyway, these reasonings, we only need one. Here you have 5. If one of them works for you, I would say the first one actually is not that difficult, and also particularly the last one, the analysis of interdependence, might be quite accessible. Then that's good. Actually, it says here in every one of them we then read, right? For example, the first, the analysis of a nature shows that phenomena are neither one thing nor many things. Therefore, phenomena do not truly exist. And also, Shantarakshita, he would say, that's it. You just need that in the what's called the adornment of the middle way. That's his preferred. Then we have the analysis of causes, or the Vajra sliver reasonings. Vajra sliver is something that can undo, a bit like diamond, something that can really undo something that's sitting, that's wedged, something that can wedge in and cut the connection. So these Vajra slivers, that reasoning, shows that phenomena do not actually come into existence, and that is the whole point here. They just don't come into existence. You have your phenomena, you have yourself, but there's never any true existence that comes into it, and that is juxtaposed with the fact that we do attribute solidity, rigidity to the self, and we do project solidity onto the other, to phenomena. But what these Raja slivers do then is show that phenomena do not arise from themselves, from something other than themselves, from both or without causes. Therefore, phenomena do not truly exist. Again, so the as we'll see, the first 2 really are the main ones, and the other 2, because they're shown to be not function, then the other 2 implicitly also are refuted. So then there's the analysis of result. The same thing, just going at phenomena from the point of view that we might think that there actually is some existing result. First is looking at the causes. This looks at the result, and we'll see here that phenomena, that existing results do not arrive, and existing results do not arrive, and phenomena that are non-existing results do not arise. Basically meaning that something which is existent cannot give rise to something that's non-existent, and something non-existent cannot give rise to existence. So basically coming back to, in terms of existence again, showing that nothing arises. We'll look at it. The analysis of both causes and results. And also that's quite intuitive, and I liked Andy's example there with what happens when we're breaking at a light. Yeah, shows that one cause does not produce one result. One cause does not produce many results. Many causes do not produce one result, and many causes do not produce many results. Therefore, phenomena do not truly exist. The analysis of interdependence shows that there are no phenomena that exist under their own power. They only appear through the gathering of causes and conditions. Therefore, phenomena do not exist. There's an intuitive angle on all of this, which is that we actually know this. But at the same time, there's a place where we fall back on insecurity and a basic assumption of self, And that we can call the innate attribution of true existence. And then there's the acquired one, which are then the philosophies that we have. So Andy makes a point here. Make sure you understand the logic and take your time to let it sink in. This might take some time, but at the same time, it's not impossible. And there really is a great value in this. We're not doing something hugely complicated. We're really just attacking a condition of delusion. And this is something where we can use our rational mind. And the thing is also, the benefit of the rational mind is it doesn't change. I think I've said that many times. We don't fall prey to inspiration disease. Once we establish that 2 + 2 is 4, doesn't matter if it's a rainy day or a sunny day. That's how we know that's how it is. We don't sort of just go with an inspired attitude. So the logic is important. And then also he says, note the illustration at the end of the reasonings. For example, all phenomena, such as this desk, do not truly exist because they are neither one thing nor many things, just like a desk in a dream. So phenomena, yes, they operate, sure, it's a desk, but they have no more reality than a desk in a dream. To make it more vivid, we ask what it is that possibly bugs us with the logic. And that's why we need to sit with the discomfort a little bit. And the more we can articulate that, the more actually we can begin to see the value of the logic. When we're approaching this whole project, find a balance between analyzing and resting. That you just have moments where you just settle into meditation. So you're not pushing yourself. And you can do something playful, like Andy did with his little experiment with the sprout in his retreat. The main thing is really to personalize it and make it work for you. So we're looking at then the analysis of nature, the first of the 5 reasonings. So first we need to know what it means that things truly exist. So this is, of course, getting at where it is that we have a true sense of there is something. So we could say, yes, there's a computer here, and there's a table, and so forth. And in fact, in some traditions, the teacher would start off, insulting the student. What? Me? I didn't steal your money. That sort of thing. So there's ways to make a keen sense of that we have a very clear perception of ourselves. So what we're doing is because we're refuting it because it's a mistake. And like I said earlier, it's not because we want to just agree with the Dalai Lama or we want to sort of fit in. It's because there's a big mistake in the accounts. We need to get to the bottom of why the accounts aren't working. So, and he says, all phenomena, such as the desk, do not truly exist because they are neither one thing nor many things, just like a desk in a dream. So the table in front of us is not a plurality, is not in these parts. So the table is not many things. So what we mean here is that we have many parts to the table, right? But it's not as if the legs, the tabletop, and so on, these are the table. So it's not as if there's many different tables, as many as there's parts. If we went down to molecular, then we'd obviously have infinite amounts. So likewise, I was also thinking if we have a spouse, our spouse is not many different things, and yet our spouse is not the same person from day to day. What is it? Sting sings. She can be 4 seasons in one day. So we know that that our partner or a friend and so forth is not many different things. But at the same time, hey, you're not also you're not dating many different people, right? So there is a sense that there's also a unity. So we can't say there are many, and we also can't say it's one. It's not singular, it is made up of many parts. Table is a label imputed on an appearance. And so when we understand this this neither one nor many, then we can see, we can, for example, say, we're in a town, we're in London. Well, find exactly the place in London. Is there a little plaque, Mm-mm. A beach, many, many grains of sand. A piece of music, what exactly is that piece of music? It's many, many, many different things, and yet it is just one piece of music. Same, and we can apply this, and Andy makes an important point, that we very often have strong attitudes about friends and enemies. Of course, the more we know somebody, the more we actually know dependent arising, the more we understand it's complex. If somebody asks us what's somebody we barely know like, we'll say, oh yeah, they're okay. Or, no, no good. But if we know them more and more and more, then we'll end up saying, well, it's complex. So Andy says, all phenomena, such as friends and enemy, do not truly exist because they are neither one thing nor many things, just like friends and enemies in a movie. So the things about friends and enemies in a movie, we're not caught up. We know that this is just a construction. So we have naturally in this example, we have the understanding that there's just a dependent arising. Whereas very often we miss out that point with our real friends and enemies. And that's where we want to actually go back to the logic here. They are neither one thing nor many things. This also applies to anything, including the various ways we suffer. So also they are not, suffering is also not one or many, like suffering in a dream. I know we do suffer. We're not saying we're not suffering, but the more we can have this insight, the more we'll have a different perspective. This is implicit in some ways also in the vipassana that what's his name, John Kabat-Zinn brought to his pain clinics, people who are in constant pain. It actually works. It's not just a glib cliche here, annoying glib cliche, but it actually works. And through understanding, then seeing through the ways that we engage with an experience, we can develop a different experience, different perspective, leading to a different experience. Jamgon Kongtrul then says in The Treasury of Knowledge, reasons stating that a sprout and other things are devoid of both real unity and real plurality prove that such things have no reality. This reasoning that something is neither a single unit nor a plurality is the root of all reasonings that negate true existence, which all four Buddhist philosophical systems consider to be the object of negation. So notice right from the beginning here, we actually did have this approach of seeing that assumptions, appearances, they're deceptive. So we're continually gaining this vipassana of seeing through assumptions, and we're negating this idea of true existence. So now we're going to look at no arising. Things don't come into existence. And that's where we're going to use the Vajra slivers. True existence here is refuted as nothing has come into existence. Or rather, the reason is since nothing has come into existence, nothing has arisen. So there's not any true existence in anything. Hence, this is where you come across these confounding Buddhist expressions that all phenomena are unborn, or attaining realization of the unborn, or the patience of the unborn, and so forth. And Karr says, if things truly exist, then they would have to be produced or arise. And the production or arising must be from one or other of the following. This arising must take place from the phenomena itself, from something other than itself or themselves, from both of these, or without a cause. Again, you can think about that, but this, what we call the tetralemma, is supposedly tight in that it really accommodates basically the options of arising from itself or from other. We have it a little bit in Plato. I'm a bit cautious with this because it's always difficult to draw parallels. I'm also doing it later with Hume. But Plato talks about the what's it called again? The image of the caves. The cave where we don't really see phenomena. Phenomena are there, but we're not seeing them properly. We just see shadows of them. If we turn around and actually look outside of the dark cave, which is ignorance, then we would see phenomena in themselves. But that would mean any given phenomena exists on an ideal level. And that would mean that is one way of talking about production from self, possibly. The object of refutation here is particularly what's called the Samkhya school in which is an Indian system that would say that the creator and what is created is the same, and that's where it comes back to where the Prasangikas they would say some things about the presence of the cause in the result and so forth. It's difficult to how do you say? It's a difficult one to defend. Anyway, that and then also the from other than themselves is more sort of how we conventionally see things. So default perceptions that things do arise from itself is like we'd say, my house is just there. This is to some extent just the default position that we just assume the house is just there. But the thing is, if we begin to apply philosophy and then say it exists as such and is solidly there, that's where some of our mistaken assumptions about what we perceive take place. We might not have philosophy, but we might also still be stuck with this idea of the existence. It's just there. Then there's the other, this was made in a factory, and it wasn't there before, but it then, out of various things, it arose. And then there's from both, well, we could say that there both is something that's from itself, the burger and the process, that's other. So Andy gives this example. And, well, actually, he doesn't use the veggie burger. That's my interpretation. And then without a cause, this thought just popped into my head. Anyway, these, just from the mere fact that they depart from some of the ways that they are treated, the examples that we have in traditional Buddhist presentations, actually reflects this process that we necessarily need to engage, which is the process of contemplation, using our own examples. Trungpa Rinpoche, with regards to no arising, he says, emptiness is not an easy idea to grasp at first. Because it is not so easy, we will approach the notion of emptiness from the standpoint of how, if at all, results arise from causes in order to see that while phenomena certainly function according to a successive pattern, one condition arising out of another, nonetheless, the actual arising itself can never be discovered. In other words, in the ultimate sense, there is no reality to arising. That's a long sentence. By a careful analysis, we can gain an intellectual appreciation of emptiness. Okay, I did actually something down here, which is I took the same paragraph and I broke down the sentences a little bit. So in slightly other words, emptiness is not an easy idea to grasp at first. Because it is not easy, we will approach the notion of emptiness from the standpoint of how, if at all, results arise from causes. Okay, that's what we're doing here. Do they arise from causes? Now, the purpose of doing that is to see that while phenomena certainly function according to a successive pattern with one condition arising out of another, nonetheless, the actual arising itself can never be discovered. In other words, in the ultimate sense, there is no reality to arising. By a careful analysis, we can gain an intellectual appreciation of emptiness. We're not denying any phenomena, we're just saying that there's not an actual. It's like us. We're not our final, we're going to be different tomorrow. We're not our final product. Nothing is. I'm very happy to see there's no questions. That means everybody's completely cool with what's being said here. That's really good. But Nagarjuna in Mula Madhyamika Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, he says, and this is where he then has these four: not from self, not from other, not from both, nor without cause. Things do not arise at any place at any times. Bottom line is here, things do not arise. And the argument is up here. So let's look at arising from a self. If something, so Andy Karr says, if something already exists, why does it need to arise again? To say that it arose is meaningless because it already exists. This is one reason that it doesn't make sense to say that things arise from themselves. If things really did arise from themselves, they would arise endlessly because their causes would always be present. So, summarizing it here a little bit, if a sprout did come from itself, it would be no different from the seed, or the seed would be no different from the sprout. Yeah? There would be no need for anything. It's already existing, right? So, hence the idea of something arising from itself, difficult. Now, if then the seed would continue to exist when there is a sprout, we'd have a lot of sprouts coming. So again, saying if the result is the same as the cause, it means that when something happens, if 5-year-old Jakob is no different from 62-year-old Jakob, then the seed of the cause has not stopped. Then we're going to have not only 5-year-old Jakob, but out of that we're going to have 6, 7, 8-year-old. The cause is always destroyed with the existence of the product. So that's where we would say, if that were the case, the seed would still exist when there's a sprout, then we'd have a lot of production. It would be basically the solution to famine. Tsultrim Gyamtso, he says in a short, beautiful summary, really, of the wisdom of the the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, the Mula Madhyamika Karika. He says here, when we say that two things, okay, so that was the first one. That was a brief refutation of arising from a self. So we've done the first one. Then there's arising from other. Okay, there's actually a question here. Let me just take that. Is there any situation in modern Western thinking that anyone would argue that something arises from itself? Well, we would say that this is more directed at, and of course we don't want to be terribly polemical, and we wouldn't turn this into some sort of crusade, but we would just identify that the notion that, and this might not be part of some modern people's view, but this thought that everything is God's creation. And that's universal among many different cultures. Everything is God's creation. That God is in one, it's all united. That's where we would then have that position. Yeah, that's one way I can think of it. But it's true. This generally we understand, brought up on modern science, and that is very much modern science contention with religion, right? That is that we do see phenomena in terms of cause and effect. What about something arising from itself, meaning an aspect of self, something arising so as to be known by the self, i.e., self-knowledge, or a cyclic process of completion and destruction, etc.? Well, in that case, then the object of that knowledge is different. So again, we have a dependent arising. So again, that wouldn't be the same. If an aspect of the self, as we understand it here, is not the same thing, right? So it is a this and a that, a knowledge that is an object of yes, it appears differently, definitely. But in terms of saying that it is the self, that's the problem. Does arisen also imply that it cannot change? Otherwise, it wouldn't exist ultimately. That's true. As soon as we say something comes into existence, then that would mean that it no longer changes. So the very fact that phenomena function and are continually changing is because they don't exist, so to speak. They don't ever attain true existence. So the appearance that we have is something that operates with continual causes and conditions, hence having no reality. So basically we could say the emptiness of phenomena is what enables them to function. So what's this here? There's one last one there. So change is only possible when things are empty. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then again, even the notion of change is relative. We could say that's an appearance. But yes, as far as our relative perception goes, then things are continually changing, and in that they don't possess any inherent existence, they have never come into existence. So basically dependent arising enables us to understand both things as they are and also how they manifest relatively, or how they appear. So Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso says here, when we say that two things are different from each other, so this is the second option, right? Arising from other. Here, when we say that two things are different from each other, it means that they have no connection between them, that they are separate and completely independent entities. They are like a horse and cow. Now, I actually uploaded more from Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso from a teaching that he gave, that was published. He gave it in 1999 in Seattle, and so I put up just a relevant section up in the reading folder. But in there he says entities do not arise from something different from themselves, because at the same time the cause is present, the result is not. So if they were other, then the other would have to be present at the same time. Since it's not something other, then we have something that leads to another thing. So the cause and result phenomenon does not mean that they are the same, but it also doesn't mean that they are other. It does not mean they're other, and that's where the idea of other again is not understood as not like horse and that would mean a horse and cow, completely disassociated. Any production or arising we can think of is just a concept superimposed on this vivid appearance. When you look at the glass or any object in front of you, you cannot find its arising. So in this way, then the phenomenon are not coming out of other either. Now, I was just happened upon something, reading something where someone's talking. This is a guy called Tom Butler Bowden, and he speaks on David Hume, who was famous for what is called radical skepticism. And in there, he says in one really important work that he wrote when he was very young, but nobody actually bothered to read it. Later, he wrote a big history on England and so forth. He became quite well known, but early on he wrote this thing called An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. He says, when we look about us towards external objects and consider the operations of causes, we are never able in a single instance to discover any power or necessary connection, any quality which binds the effect to the cause and render one an infallible consequence of the other. So just to draw in from a Western philosophical position, then a similar, you could say, disputing the production from other. And in the same book, I was also intrigued to read. This author, he writes, Hume also rejected the idea that there is a solid unitary self, an I, We are rather merely a bundle of perceptions, our mind like a theater whose sets and scenes change every minute. Hume doubted Descartes' idea that because we are thinking, we exist. All he felt could be said was that thoughts exist, but it is hardly proves the existence or permanence of the self or an individual soul. So again, we're not denying that children are produced by a set of parents or that bananas grow from banana trees and so forth. That's all good. We're just undermining this, and if we did so, we'd also undermine actually the notion of karma, that things lead to a result. But we're just denying the notion that there's other. So it's neither self nor other that produces something. So we would say that things appear, yet have no true production. They are unborn, just like a unicorn in a dream. So Andy Karr says, all the logical flaws of the two individual views are still present when you combine them. And so arising from a self and other together is also impossible. Chandrakirti dispatches this explanation with the following analogy, right? Because we just have two invalid positions, right? Production from self and from other. He says, since one sesame seed can produce sesame oil, many sesame seeds can produce a lot of oil. But since one grain of sand cannot produce any sesame oil, many grains of sand cannot produce any sesame oil either. So in that either of these two are a bit like grains of sand, nothing's going to come from these positions. Hume was in the 17th century. I'm not, maybe 18th century. I don't think he would have known. We have some Western philosophers like Schopenhauer who were inspired by the Buddha. So there's a cheeky fellow here who says, "I am not, therefore I emanate." Okay. So we do have the so we have philosophers, but I don't think Hume. I don't think Buddhism was that well known at that time. Now remember, when there's so much of this, we're not denying functioning relative reality at all. So all the various ways that phenomena manifest, either in samsara or nirvana, all good as long as we don't take them to be having true existence. It's not as if you're going to go into nirvana and then that's where it has true existence. Mind you, we'll look at that. So when you analyze causeless arising, that's the last kind, it's easy to see absurd consequences. If things arose causelessly, then everything would also be present, or else nothing would ever be present. This is because causes and non-causes would be equally capable or incapable of producing results. The fact that things arise sometimes and at other times do not shows that things arise when their causes and conditions gather. They do not arise causelessly. So just take this with you and check these things. The punchline is obviously that things exist relatively. You have short and you have long, right? And nobody's going to deny if that's your car up here, that's a short one compared to the stretch limo. But then again, you have down here compared to this one, then that is short. They're both right. It is right, this is long. It is right, this is short. This gentleman is right, this is a 6. That gentleman is right, that is a 9. And so when we are saying, and these guys are talking about, yes, that's a 6 for sure. But with these lines of reasonings that we see here, implies that things have not come into existence as a 6 or a 9. Actually, this is good news. We can put down the burden of being this insistent person You know, the sage that sits over here, very peacefully saying, I understand you think it's a, it's a 9. And the other one, no, brother, I get it. Does look like a 6 to you, and so on, right? So in a way, we are opening up for a dimension of easier, but we want to establish it really in terms of hard logic. There are still appearances, perceptions, as we have them in dreams. No more, no more and no less real. So Chandrakirti says, since things do not arise from self, other, both, nor without cause, they have no inherent nature at all. Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso was extraordinary, still is, obviously. I think he's still with us, but his methodology was very much combining the hard logic of the philosophers with the joyous yogic aspect of the Kagyu lineage. And so very often in the context of his teaching, if not all his teaching, the teaching would always end with singing. And one of Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso's students, Jim Scott, he would put these to melody, and some of the students could play music instruments, so they would very often end up singing songs of Milarepa. And of course, Milarepa's songs also in Tibet were hugely chanted, and are very much reflects this heritage of living this experience. So this is from Milarepa's song No Birth, No Base and Union. He sings, what defines appearances is that they've never been born. If birth seems to happen, it's just clinging, nothing more. What defines samsara is its lack of a base or a root. If there is a base or root, that's only a thought. Yes, Milarepa's delightful. I like Milarepa's one, somebody says. Makes me laugh and so clear. Absolutely. And there's so much also, the presence of the individual as somebody who's really gone through the path. So inspiring, right? Really recommend reading Milarepa's life. It's extraordinary. So further reasoning. So we looked at 2 of the 5 so far. Andy Karr says, the first Madhyamika reasoning, the analysis of nature, demonstrates that since all phenomena are beyond being one thing or many things, they have no essence. The second reasoning, the analysis of causes, demonstrates that since phenomena cannot arise from any of the 4 possibilities, they do not truly exist. Now, what now follows, he says, the third reasoning, the analysis of results, is similar to the analysis of causes, but it comes at it from a different angle. It again investigates our assumptions about causality, but instead of looking at the origin of phenomena, as we did in the analysis of cause, the analysis of results looks more directly at the appearing phenomena itself. This might be infuriating, and I can't guarantee I can convince you, or this will convince you, but it's somehow as stark as this. Something existent will not give rise to something non-existent, as per the compatibility between cause and effect. Now, that also means something non-existent will not give rise to something existent. Now, this means that if we have something that exists, it will not turn into something non-existent, right? So if it already exists, then we're not going to all of a sudden have something, right? If it's already there, then what's the need for production? There would be nothing coming out of it. So as such, it's not as if something existent can give rise to something else that's not existent. And if it is existent, then why any production altogether? And if it didn't exist before, then the causes for something to be existent is not there. If the sound already existed, how did your snapping fingers produce it? We would say, hey, this is the fingers that produce it. Okay, that's fine. Then it's a dependent arising. We can't say there was something existent that gave rise to it. If the sound did not already exist, how did snapping your fingers produce it? If there was nothing there before, then that's fine that it's there, but don't come and say that there was an existent cause. So the bottom line here is saying that that looking into results, because that there's nothing which is existent as such, neither in terms of cause or effect, also they're not truly existent. Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you. Somebody says, ha, I just got it. That's pretty comprehensive. It works like this. This stuff, all of a sudden it'll kind of go, oh yes. Now, then we have one that, and I have to say I struggled a bit with this one, and looking at Andy's explanation, actually, I found that was quite helpful. Let's see here. The analysis of both causes and results. One cause, now that would be that one cause produces one result, that one cause produces many results, that many causes produce one result, many causes produce many results. And so what we see here is in the case of the first one, when we are driving and we stop at a red light, there's a lot of things that are happening in terms of us, and that is the basis for this one result, and also we don't have just one result. We have many different. There's the light that comes up, and then we act in a particular way, and so forth. So in that case, then what we would say, the car stopping with in terms of both our knowledge and also the way that we behave, the pressing down and all of that, that's not a single cause and a single result. Of course, then Andy Karr gives the example of when he was a student and he was, what was the term again? He was a rabid behavioral a rabid behavioral psychotherapist or psychoanalyst or whatever, cognitive scientist. Anyway, of course, it reminds of behaviorism, as in Skinner's thesis, with all the identifying, understanding humanity through their external behavior. This is such an important point, actually. This is a turning point in Western psychology. Some of the early Western psychologists, they intended, like William James, intended that we actually would look inward to understand psychological phenomena. But because that couldn't lend itself to the objectivist format of third-person observation, it was dismissed, and then you had the likes of Skinner, who then came up with our understanding of the human psyche through what can be observed externally. And basically ending up, so we now have that the mind is understood exclusively in terms of these external signs. So it becomes increasingly reductionistic. And we looked at this notion of reductionism earlier on. So it's not just the light turning red that creates all the resulting actions. So it's not as if just this red light produces many different results. And also, that many causes produce one result. Also not, obviously, there's on both sides, there's many different. And when we say then that many causes produce many results, we can also say yes, but it's not as if there's a corresponding between a set number of many causes and a set number of many results, because any of these can be subdivided. And so Andy Karr says this reasoning highlights the way concepts impute causes and results to appearances that do not truly exist as unitary things. So next time you're driving with somebody scolding you for not paying attention to the red light, you can just say, "Oh, there's many different reasons for that." What if no one heard the snapping of fingers? How does one talk about the existence or non-existence of sound? Well, we're not at this point. We're not going into that discussion, but we would still say that even the way that we construct the notion of the snapping of fingers is still in terms of the codependent, oh sorry, the, the dependent arising of an observer and the object that is observed. And so even we talked about this earlier actually, if in the case of the tree in the forest, that there's still the way that we perceive it and think of it as sound as such is very much dependent on our particular angle. Even if we have a apparatus out in the forest hearing this and so forth. So there's continually this and even if somebody doesn't hear it, then you might feel it, right? There's still the sensation of something. So we have a phenomenon. That's the basic thing. There's a phenomenon in which there's a perceiver. So in this case, it still applies the non-existence of the result, or the dependent arising of the result. So then, again, this is actually also important, beyond developing our confidence in the emptiness of phenomena, there's another benefit that comes from contemplating this reasoning, and that applies to everything really. It can help us understand the workings of karma. As soon as we understand emptiness, meaning that things aren't in one way, we have that empowered situation that we know that anything can be changed. And that's also really irritating with Buddhists, because they're never going to just go down and just say, "Oh, it's a pity." They'll always be damn constructive. They always say, "Well, it's not fixed. It ain't over yet," and so forth. So there's no capitulating to situations, but it also comes with this understanding that then, because things can shift on the basis of causes like our attitudes and the actions and so forth, then everything's workable. It's a very empowering understanding in terms of what then we can do. So we actually would say the paradoxical thing is, the more we understand emptiness, the more we understand karma. Sometimes you can say emptiness as understanding it as openness. Things aren't a one-shot deal. So the last one of these reasonings, which is also known as the king of reasonings, a bit like the first one, is this unity of appearance and emptiness, unity of existence and emptiness, unity of dependent arising and interdependence of, arising and interdependence, unity of dependent arising or interdependence and emptiness. Now it's famously said that the first four, they can't stop snapping my fingers. The first four, they remove our assumption about the solidity of phenomena. But we could fall into a very nihilistic position, which we also have in modern Western philosophy, the likes of, the existentialist, Derrida, Rorty, and so forth, where we live in a post-truth era, right? The lack of foundations in philosophy and so forth, where we fall into a nihilist position. And we have this again also with the existentialist, with the reductionist view that leads to nothing, is unfortunately also doesn't provide us to appreciate how things appear. So even though we might want to sort of take out the solidity of things, once that solidity is taken out, it doesn't mean that we're left with nothing. In fact, that opens up for seeing reality far more clearly. So the sage is somebody who's bright-eyed and vividly experiencing, not closed off. And so we, with an understanding of the reasoning of great interdependence, we eliminate the idea of solid appearance, but we also eliminate the idea that of solid absence. So that's why we see that appearance and emptiness is the same. Form is emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. And so everything we experience is no longer filtered or diminished. It's no longer as pale as it was because of our no longer subjecting it to this distortion through our objectification or our fixating. So that's why we talk about the harmony of dependent arising and emptiness. Nagarjuna, he's the great champion of this. He writes, this is in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way. Yeah. If something exists in dependence upon something else, if something exists in dependence of something else, but that thing upon which it depends must also depend upon it, then which one of these exists in dependence upon which? It's like we say this and that. So we would observe how there is always something. There's the seed, but then there's the plant where the seed originated from, which again came from the sprout, which again came from the seed, etc. So in that way, it's like Mipam Rinpoche, then Andy Karr quotes Mipam Rinpoche. So, but the point is, there's nothing that's more real than anything else. So we have something, phenomena that exist, they're empty, and yet it's not as if the emptiness is a bigger deal than the appearance aspect. It's a unity. Mipam Rinpoche illustrates this predicament with the image of two rocking boats tied together on the high seas. Since neither of the boats is steady to begin with, neither can be used to steady the other. So we're never ever going to just go into a place of emptiness. Now I'm in the state of emptiness. That's not solid at all. Even if we might think, oh, he realized emptiness, realizing emptiness doesn't lend itself to the absence of solidity in a given phenomenon. Equally manifest. Again, this is good news, but it's important that we keep this with our understanding then of what we understand as emptiness. Chandrakirti explains this then in the Madhyamika Avatara. Actually, what we had, this is one translation, but we also actually here Andy operates with a translation which I don't know if it was ever published, but it's from Ari Goldfield, Khenpo Tsultrim's translator. Anyway, in here Chandrakirti explains, he says, empty things like reflections and so forth are known to arise due to the coming together of causes and conditions, just as it is from a reflection or some other empty phenomenon. A consciousness beholding the image of that arises. So it is that even though all things are empty, from the empty causes and conditions, they vividly arise. So in there also, Andy, he would say, it's like we have clearly a moon in the water, and yet we know that that is not the moon. Songtse Rinpoche will enjoy telling the story about all the monkeys that saw that, good grief, the moon had fallen into the water. So they all sort of climbed out on a limb, and then holding onto each other's tails, then they tried to, one last one was supposed to pick it up from the water. Unfortunately, the whole thing collapsed and they all fell into the water. But the illusion is that we think this is there's somebody out there. When we look in a mirror, sorry, I was thinking when we have a mirror, then we'll look in the reflection, yeah, and we'll we know that it's just an empty phenomenon, but it's still very useful, and we'll still be sort of checking, it still functions. So, coming back to this idea of emptiness, if emptiness is possible, then everything is possible. But if emptiness is impossible, then nothing else is possible either. Basically, the impossible thing that if things truly existed, then they would always be in one way and everybody would see it in the same way. So clearly that is not the case. So emptiness is not that difficult to understand. Now remember one thing when we're talking about emptiness here, by the way, we come back to this thing that what we call the, what is it again? The approximate absolute and the actual absolute. So here we're just working with the approximate absolute. We begin to get a grip or an idea about what is so great about emptiness. But the realization of it, of course, that is the process of the path. So we're only catching on to it. To have full realization is then what we call the actual ultimate. And then again, that's also going back to the Svatantrikas that have these divisions, which are quite helpful. Heuristic devices, things that are helpful for our, understanding. And Nagarjuna also says, whatever has dependently arisen is explained to be emptiness. Its existence is imputed in dependence upon something else. And this is the path of the middle way. Again, coming back to our hero, Milarepa, he chants, here on Kunsel, Rinchen Drak, the precious peak where all is clear. I remember appearances are example of impermanence. I see sense pleasures as a mirage, this life like a dream and an illusion. And I cultivate compassion for all who do not know this. I eat the food of empty space. I meditate without distraction. I have different experiences. Just about anything can happen. Emma, the phenomena of the three realms of samsara, while not existing, they appear. How incredibly amazing. So I think we'll do a little bit of the analysis of the automobile. Just sort of the first part of it. Yeah? Okay. In the Madhyamika Avatara, the introduction to the middle way, there's about 15 verses that deal with this. And it is famously also known as Chandrakirti's sevenfold analysis. So it's called, and also known as the analysis of the cart. But we don't see a lot of carts these days. So we've appropriately renamed the analysis a little bit. But we're going to start with first the notion of what we're doing here, which is realizing this emptiness nature. But it's approached in different ways. So Andy identifies then how a sangha, he would speak about how this is gradually realized, where on the level of the Shravakas, and seeing this not as distinct different camps, but more in terms of the gradual development, then the Shravakas, they don't actually realize the selflessness of the individual. Well, they realize it, but not fully. So they partially realize the selflessness of individual, but okay, let's say there's some understanding of selflessness of the individual. Then the Pratyekya Buddhas, they realize that, and they also realize the emptiness of the perceived objects. But that's at what we call phenomenal emptiness. So we would say that when it comes to emptiness, that consists of the emptiness of subject and the emptiness of object. And that's where they, as far as the emptiness goes, they actually only realize the objective emptiness, and they still haven't fully understood the emptiness of the self. So this is a little bit confusing, because when we say the Shravakas, they realize the selflessness on the individual. We say that, okay, that's one emptiness down, and then we would say the Shravakas then have a realization also, but that's only actually half of a realization, because it's only the realization of the phenomenal, the realization of the phenomenal object. It's not actually understanding the phenomenal subject. So we talk about that as 1.5 emptiness. Anyway, when you have the bodhisattvas, they realize the emptiness of both the subject, and that also includes the selflessness of the individual, and the objective phenomena. There's nothing that they fixate on or objectify. So that's what we call great emptiness. So that's the gradual way. But Chandrakirti, and that's basically based on Nagarjuna, he then presents this analysis of the selflessness of phenomena. And he would say, if you realize selflessness of phenomena, then you also implicitly will have a lot easier in understanding the selflessness of the individual. Now, what we've done here in terms of this work here is with the 5 reasonings of Madhyamaka. It's essentially establishing the phenomenal emptiness of the emptiness of phenomena. So in this way, we've established the emptiness of objects, of phenomena, and even though implicit in that also is the individual, we're now going to go more specifically into establishing the emptiness of the individual. So you could say the 5 Madhyamaka reasons we looked at earlier, they cover everything. But we're going to go into this, because this fixating on self is so basic to us, we're going to also look at the selflessness of the individual, the emptiness of individual. Now, what we call self, and then here we're approaching it then in terms of this notion that, and also we want to be clear then, again, coming back to this, me, looking out for number 1, right? So that's where Chandrakirti says, seeing that all faults and afflictions without exception arise from the view of the transitory collection, and understanding that the object of that view is the self, yogis refute the self. So don't worry, we're going to look at what this transitory collection is, obviously. But when we say that all faults and afflictions arise from this view of the self, or the transitory collection, that thing, which is the self. When we say that these afflictions, what are they? They are the 4 great rivers of suffering. They are birth, old age, sickness, and death. And they're also then what causes that, essentially the karma and the kleshas, or kleshas and karma. First the afflictions, me, then my strategies, and then the patterns of these. Now all of that can be, if we look at the genealogy of how did samsara happen, well, if you come across some of these cheeky Madhyamaka people, they'll say, oh, it's never actually happened. It hasn't arisen. But in terms of our experience, then it comes from this imputing a self on the aggregates. Now we already seen that the aggregates, there's 5 of them. So we have form, feeling, and so on. And so that's where we say, that is me, my body, my mind, my person. Now all of that is imputing a self on what is in fact just a transitory collection. That's a delusion. And so that is what is the object of refutation. That's where the yogi, sounds like the yogi is an intolerant person, but the yogi is just somebody who's seeing through a delusion. It's somebody who's awake. And the yoga here lies in aligning oneself with the purity of wisdom that is the innate disposition. So that's where we're not giving into this delusional condition. So, now if we think of this, is the self the same as or different from the skandhas? Well, if it's different, it would not be any of the skandhas. That means, okay, self is different from what? It's different from my body. Okay, then myself has nothing to do with my body. The feelings, the perceptions, formations, and so forth, all of these, we can't say it's we can't say the different, right? We can't say self is different from all of what we are, right? So is it the same? Well, in that case, since I have hands, nose, ears, and also there's all the different aspects of who I am, then is there many? No, it seems to be sort of just the notion of me, right? Then there's the idea that there's a continuum, that there's something that continues, again, cause and effect. This has already been seriously disproven earlier. Yes, there's definitely something that carries on, but in terms of it actually being the self. And then there's also the idea of an inexpressible self. Well, even if it's inexpressible, it would actually have to be self or something else. Self or something, the skandhas, it would still have to come back to the same thing. The sage would still have a body. There would still be, even if it's inexpressible, there's still the same thing happening. 5 skandhas. So Chandrakirti says, therefore, the self is not different from the aggregates, nor is it the aggregates themselves, nor is it the collection of them, and therefore, no matter what its base of reference, the mind thinking self is illogical. And that's what we have. We have an attribution to the physical and psychological dimension of who we are as me. But also, right in the middle of this logic, I'd also like to try and see how we're much more easygoing in terms of the experience when we're not rigid on me, and how when we're letting go, much easier. But anyway, yeah. So this view of the transitory collection, it then is seen in terms of the the first is we're thinking we are the phenomena, thinking this body, this brain, so forth, this personality, this is me. And then that's one way, we are the phenomena. Then there's the possession. We think this is my, my arm, my this, my house, my etc. Again, me. Third is that we're supported by phenomena, thinking I exist based on this body, this mind, or this due to having this me, then we have all these things. So in this way, in conjunction with the 5 skandhas, then we have 4 subcategories. We could take this to each of these, we could say the form is me. Then we could also say the feeling is me. Then the perceptions or concepts is me. The styles of volition is me. Consciousness is me, and so on. So that's where we say we are. We can also say we have them, or based on them, or that they exist based on me, and so forth. So all of these add up to then what we call the 20-fold view of the transitory collection. Don't be freaked out by that. It's just that we end up saying there's 20 views. But it's important actually also to see the composite nature of this. So Andy Karr says, to fully overcome all faults and afflictions, we need to develop the prajna that realizes selflessness. This cuts through the view of the self and the 20 lofty peaks at the same time. And he quotes Chandrakirti, who writes, the Vajra-like realization of selflessness destroys the apprehension of self, and at the same time, the 20 lofty peaks of the mountainous view of the transitory collection, they are destroyed as well. Now, there's a lot of talk here about self, by the way. And you might just think, well, people who just watch TV, they don't have that problem. When I grew up and I was interested in yoga, my dad would say that's very navel-gazing, very self-centered, and so forth. But the thing is, actually, we're getting to the bottom of this. Self-centering happens. And if we don't look at it, we actually subscribe to it. And it can become a very rigid part of us. I think I probably mentioned I uploaded a piece by Matthew Ricard and another French academic, which looks at the experience of self-centering versus selflessness in terms of how it affects happiness. So we can take an intuitive approach of this and appreciate that getting to the bottom of this is really actually going to the end of arriving at the end of self-centering. Yeah. Okay. What does Chandrakirti say about the appearance of subject and object before other apputation? For example, an I consciousness. Does that necessarily involve an afflicted attachment to a self? Well, any of the consciousnesses, as we've just looked at here, as soon as there is these 20 lofty peaks, we actually have the consciousness, for example, the various kinds of consciousness that will say, I like what I see, or, and that's my painting. I paid a lot of money for that painting. It's mine. I like. Or something else that we want. We like that, and it gives us joy to look at it. So again, that involves an afflicted attachment to a self. Of course, it doesn't mean that the sage are not seeing things, but because they don't have the attachment, and because there's not that duality in terms of that is good, that is bad, and I like, I dislike, then this consciousness does not perpetuate the attachment to the self. There's a famous line from Milarepa's guru, who was Mapa. His guru was called Naropa, and Naropa underwent some pretty tough treatment under his teacher, who was Tilopa. And Tilopa one day, this was one of the more easy teachings, he said, Naropa, the problem is not the object. You're not fettered by the object. You're fettered by the perceiving self. Cut that. Or rather, he said, you're not caught by the grasping to the object, but you're caught by the fixating, the subject's fixating. He said, cut the fixating. So we operate with this problem on the basis of the fixating. So that's where we are not really the objects of our perceptions are not the problem. It's our fixating on them. Okay, I'm going to leave the. What comes next now will be the section of the analysis of the vehicle, and we'll look at that next time. I don't know if I can say it's quite involved, but it just takes a little bit of looking at. So I think with the last 5 minutes here, that would be difficult to squeeze that in. Okay, there's a. Okay. So we have somebody's thesis. Okay. That's good. Why not? Okay. It's good. I think it's a medium-sized thesis, so that's good. Sorry about the length. The mere I imputed on the transitory collection is empty. This I can function, i.e., or for example, go for a walk and exist relatively as a form, which is therefore empty. And an example is a rabbit's ears. Yeah. The inherent I is just a mistaken notion. It has no form. It is not empty. It is not a relative existence. It is a non-existent. Yeah, okay, you mean it's a rabbit's, do you mean the rabbit's horns? Yeah, I think this is a classical image of a non-existent, right? The hairs on a tortoise and the horns on a rabbit, yeah? An example is the mistaken idea that the rabbit has horns, yeah. Unlike the rabbit's ears, which can function as ears, okay. Rabbit's horns can't function as horns. That's why the Shravakas say it's much easier to realize the absence of the inherent self. Because unlike all phenomena that exist, it's much easier to realize the absence of the inherent self, because unlike all phenomena that exist relatively but are empty, an inherent self doesn't even exist relatively. This sounds very plausible. I hope my reading of it did justice to the content. Thank you very much. So, subject-object is a more subtle fixation. Well, as long as there still is the notion that the object is truly existent, then we naturally have the subject-object duality. But as we actually engage with the Vajrayana, then there is the notion that if we get to the subject, which is more subtle, then also automatically the fixations, when they're pacified, then also this dissolves the grasping of the object. I don't know if that makes sense, but there is shifting from, you could say, an ontological perspective about how phenomena are, then into a more epistemic understanding, which is more the Buddha nature approach of the third turning of the wheel. Then we're more looking at non-duality and so forth. Then it's a more direct path. But still, even within that approach, there has to be an establishment of the non-existence of phenomena, of self and phenomena. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So next time, I think let's just see how we go. We're flexible, right? So read the end of the book to the end of the book. So Kars and Katz in this present chapter, the Shentong Madhyamika, the last interlude, and then very valuable, the integration of everything we've looked at here through the two aspects, or the twofold aspects of practice, which are meditation and action. Then there's conclusion. Also in the back of the book you have some short biographies, just summing up the lives of some of the people that have been referred to in this book. Okay, thank you. By this positive action may all beings perfect the accumulation of merit and wisdom, and attain the two supreme kayas which arise from merit and wisdom. Thank you.